genetics unlocked many of the secrets of life.
It's an explanatory framework within which all the rest of biology fits. Right? It's something that we use in practical biological applications, medicine, agriculture, industry. When you're getting a flu vaccine, that really depended upon evolutionary knowledge. In many, many specific ways, evolution makes a practical difference. It's not just something that happened in the past, evolution's happening now.
So if evolution has stood up to all this scrutiny, what about intelligent design? Does it play by the same rules?
If you invoke a non-natural cause, a spirit force or something like that in your research, I have no way to test it.
So, supernatural causation is not considered part of science?
Yeah. I hesitate to beg the patience of the court with this, but being a Boston Red Sox fan, I can't resist it. Yeah. One might say, for example, that the reason the Boston Red Sox were able to come back from 3 games down against the New York Yankees was because God was tired of George Steinbrenner and wanted the Red Sox to win. In my part of the country, you'd be surprised how many people think that's a perfectly reasonable explanation for what happened last year. And you know what? It could be true. But it certainly wouldn't be science. It's not scientific. And it's certainly not something we can test.
The fundamental problem with intelligent design is that you can't use it to explain the natural world. It's essentially a negative argument. It says evolution doesn't work, therefore the designer did it. Evolution doesn't work, therefore we win by default. But when you ask them, what does intelligent design tell you about nature? Does it tell you what the designer did? Does it tell you what the designer used to design something with? Does it tell you what purpose the designer had for designing something? Does it tell you when the designer did it? Why the designer did it? It doesn't tell you anything like that. Basically, it's a negative argument, and you can't build a science on a negative argument.
After 3 weeks of testimony on the nature of science, the evidence for evolution, and the failings of intelligent design, the plaintiffs had presented their case.
To watch the whole thing, you got an education in what evolution was, where evolution stands as a theory now in the 21st century. If you concentrated, you would get sucked into this thing, and the day would go by, and you'd come out and you'd think, that was amazing what I heard here. And these eloquent people, you know, with these incredible educations, and it was fantastic.
The plaintiff's attorneys had put on an amazing case. But there was this idea, especially among those who weren't sitting in the trial every day, that when the defense started, you know, then we'll see some pretty interesting stuff, too, on the other side.
The question now was, could the defense prove that intelligent design is a scientific theory? What evidence could they muster to support this claim? While the battle in federal court heated up, the atmosphere in Dover had gone from divisive to dangerous. Tammy Kitzmiller, the lead plaintiff in the case who had a daughter in 9th grade biology class at Dover High School, had been receiving hate mail since the start of the trial.
One letter was pretty disturbing. I think this was the one with the passage that the last sentence, especially, Madeline Murray was found murdered for taking prayer and Bible reading out of the schools, so watch out for a bullet. This was a letter that I made sure my lawyers got a copy of, and it was forwarded to the FBI.
Anywhere you turned, we were getting attacked. I mean, the people in the community were attacking us in the newspapers, people in our own profession were attacking us, saying, you know, what are you guys doing in Dover? Why are you letting this happen? People in the community were calling us atheists, which was a bit offensive to 2 of us in the department because 2 of us happened to be sons and daughters of ministers.
I fail to understand how teachers can call themselves Christians, go to church, talk about God, talk about Christ, and then go to school 5 days a week and talk about Darwin and teach it as if it's fact. Not a theory, but that's how it happened. I don't understand that. To me, that's talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Having ignited much of the controversy that resulted in the lawsuit, Bill Buckingham had made a surprise announcement. Citing poor health and struggles with OxyContin as a result of surgery, he resigned from the school board and moved out of state. A school board election was only months away, and now 8 of the 9 seats would be up for grabs, putting intelligent design on trial in the voting booth as well as the courtroom. Dover science teacher Brian Ream, who had already moved on to another school system, had thrown his hat in the ring.
I couldn't work for a board that was going to mandate we teach religious ideas in the science classroom. I've got kids in the district, and that's not the kind of district I want my kids going to school in. So the choice was either move the whole family or try and fix the district that we lived in. We chose to fix it.
But when he hit the campaign trail, Brian found himself again in the line of fire in the war on evolution.
The problems that I ran into in the campaign, being out door to door, where people just wouldn't listen to you and just automatically judged you in advance that you're this kind of person and we're good Christians, we'd never vote for you, and they slam the door in your face forgetting their windows are open and call you an effing a-hole or tell you you're just a damn atheist.
Every step I take in you. You walk my way, Jesus, every breath I take.
For the Reams, this was particularly hurtful. Both are active in their church and run a summer Bible school program.
We have a neighbor, actually, who was appointed to the school board and was in support of intelligent design. He was out campaigning and saying very negative things about our family, how we're atheists, and if you vote for those atheists, well then God's not going to be happy with you.
We are members of the same body, serving the Lord.
To make the case for intelligent design, the defense had lined up 8 expert witnesses, including several members of the Discovery Institute, the Seattle organization that promotes intelligent design. But of those 8 witnesses, 5 never testified.
Witnesses started dropping like flies.
We still haven't heard a complete explanation of why this happened, but there was some dispute going on between the Discovery Institute and the Thomas More Law Center over how the case would be run.
Nova made repeated requests to interview members of the Discovery Institute to talk about this and other issues, but the Institute set conditions that were inconsistent with normal journalistic practice. For the defense to win, however, did not require a large number of witnesses.
Our aim was not really to disprove Darwin's theory of evolution. Our aim was to merely show that there are credible scientists who believe that the empirical data was supportive of intelligent design. That's all we had to show.
It was our thinking, if they could prove that there was a scientific basis for intelligent design, that it would be possible that the court could conclude that there was a valid secular purpose for teaching intelligent design.
I think everybody was waiting to see whether or not the intelligent design folks had a case. But by the time we finished presenting our case, I think it was pretty clear that everything rested on Michael Behe's testimony.
A scientist and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, Michael Behe is the author of the popular intelligent design book Darwin's Black Box and dozens of papers unrelated to intelligent design published in peer-reviewed science journals. Behe refused multiple invitations from Nova to be interviewed for this program, though he went on record in the trial.
Dr. Behe, what is your profession?
I am a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
And you're a biochemist?
And that's correct, yes.
How long have you taught at the college level?
For 23 years.
Sir, what is intelligent design?
Intelligent design is a scientific theory that proposes that some aspects of life are best explained as the result of design, and that the strong appearance of design in life is real and not just apparent.
Is intelligent design based on any religious beliefs or convictions?
No, it isn't.
What is it based on?
It is based entirely on observable, empirical, physical evidence from nature, plus logical inferences.
Now, when you use the term design, what do you mean?
Well, I discuss this in my book, Darwin's Black Box. And a short description of design is shown in this quotation from Chapter 9. Quote, "What is design? Design is simply the purposeful arrangement of parts. When we perceive that parts have been arranged to fulfill a purpose, that's when we infer design." End quote.
Part of the defense strategy would be to show the judge examples of biological systems they claimed were too complex to have evolved by natural selection, and therefore must have been the product of a designer.
Can you give us a biochemical example of design, Dr. Behe?
Yes, that's on the next slide. Now, I think the most visually striking example of design is something called the bacterial flagellum. Now, this is a figure of a bacterial flagellum taken from a textbook, which is widely used in colleges and universities around the country. The bacterial flagellum is quite literally an outboard motor that bacteria use to swim. And in order to accomplish that function, it has a number of parts which are ordered to that effect. Now, this part here, which is labeled the filament, is actually the propeller of the bacterial flagellum. The motor is actually a rotary motor. And most people who see this and have the function explained to them quickly realize that these parts are ordered for a purpose and therefore bespeak design.
Under the microscope, bacteria powered by flagella seem almost acrobatic. They tumble, corkscrew, and pirouette, thanks to that whip-like filament. Driving this propeller is a tiny motor, part of a complex structure made of about 40 different kinds of proteins.
The bacterial flagellum looks like a sort of Jules Verne notion of what the future looks like. It has a strange sort of mechanical quality to it, these sort of cogs and waving tails and stuff.
And according to Behe, if any one of these parts is missing from the system, the motor can't function. Behe calls systems like this irreducibly complex, a term he coined. And he argues such systems could not have evolved naturally.
The idea is that there are certain aspects of life, perhaps organisms or organs or even cells, that in a sense could only have come about as a whole. In other words, it was very unlikely they could have come about through just a kind of contingent combination of parts over even millions or billions of years, but rather in a sense had to be created whole cloth all together at once, because everything fits together so well that to remove one part the thing wouldn't function.
Have other scientists acknowledged these design features of the flagellum?
Yes, they have. If you could advance the next slide. In 1998, a man named David de Rosier wrote an article in the journal Cell, which is a very prestigious scientific journal, entitled "The Turn of the Screw, the Bacterial Flagellar Motor." Now, David de Rosier is a professor of biology at Brandeis University in Massachusetts and has worked on the bacterial flagellar motor for most of his career. Now, in that article, he makes a statement, quote, "More so than other motors, the flagellum resembles a machine designed by a human," close quote. So David de Rosier also recognizes that the structure of the flagellum appears designed.
What I wrote was, this is a machine that looks like it was designed by a human, but that doesn't mean it was designed. That is the product of intelligent design. Indeed, this more has all the earmarks of something that arose by evolution.
Using an electron microscope, de Rosier produces ghostly pictures like this one, revealing the inner workings of what's been called the world's most efficient motor.
This is the drive shaft. This transmits this torque generated by the motor. That would then turn the propeller, which would push the bacterial cell through the fluid.
Michael Behe has argued that the flagellum could not have evolved, since its parts have no function for natural selection to act on until they are fully assembled. But evidence that refutes Behe's claim of irreducible complexity comes from a tiny syringe that injects poison, found in some of the nastiest of all bacteria.
This is a structure found, for example, in Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes the bubonic plague. And look at the similarities. Now, this structure doesn't rotate, but it still has to extend this structure, which is equivalent to the rod, the drive shaft here. It has to extend that because it needs this little channel. It's like sort of like a syringe. So the virulence factors that are made inside the cell, which is down here, can be exported, pushed up into this hole, and exported out through this long kind of needle, perhaps into a cell in your body or mine, and thereby create misery.
And it turns out the two structures look similar for a reason. The syringe on the right is made of a subset of the very same protein types found in the base of the flagellum on the left. Though the syringe is missing proteins found in the motor and therefore cannot produce rotary motion, it functions perfectly as an apparatus for transmitting disease.
So if we think about what it means to be irreducibly complex, the argument is that if you take away even one of these proteins, that the structure cannot function. And yet here is a structure that functions, that is missing several of the proteins, and yet here it is, a working, viable organelle of the bacterium. So indeed, this structure is not, in that sense, irreducibly complex.
To emphasize de Rosier's point, Miller arrived at court making an unusual fashion statement.
As an example of what irreducible complexity means, advocates of intelligent design like to point to a very common machine, the mousetrap. And the mousetrap is composed of 5 parts. It has a base plate, the catch, a spring, a little hammer that actually does the dirty work, and a bait holder. The mousetrap will not work if any one of these 5 parts are taken away. That's absolutely true. But remember the key notion of irreducible complexity, and that is that this whole machine is completely useless until all the parts are in place. Well, that turns out not to be true. And I'll give you an example. What I have right here is a mousetrap from which I've removed 2 of the 5 parts. I still have the base plate, the spring, and the hammer. Now, you can't catch any mice with this, so it's not a very good mousetrap. But it turns out that despite the missing parts, it makes a perfectly good, if somewhat inelegant, tie clip. And when we look at the favorite examples for irreducible complexity, and the bacterial flagellum is a perfect example, we find the molecular equivalent of my tie clip, which is we see parts of the machine missing 2, 3, 4, maybe even 20 parts, but still fulfilling a perfectly good purpose that could be favored by evolution. And that's why the irreducible complexity argument falls apart.
But Behe testified it's not just microscopic organisms that are irreducibly complex. Evolution, he says, fails to account for the network of organs and cells that defend us from disease.
Has the theory of evolution, in particular natural selection, explained the existence of the defensive apparatus such as the immune system?
No.
Do you consider it a problem?
I certainly consider it to be a problem. But other scientists who think that Darwinian evolution simply is true don't consider much of anything to be a problem for their theory.
If you could highlight the second full paragraph of Darwin's Black Box, page 138. What you say is, we can look high or we can look low, in books or in journals, but the result is the same. The scientific literature has no answers on the question of the origin of the immune system.
And in the context, that means that the scientific literature has no detailed, testable answers to the question of how the immune system could have arisen by random mutation and natural selection.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may. What I did was to pile on the witness stand articles all having very sophisticated explanations for how the immune system evolved, and it basically challenged him to respond given the claims he'd made.
Now, Dr. Behe, these articles rebut your assertion that the scientific literature
has no answers on the origin of the vertebrate immune system.
No, they certainly do not. My argument is that these articles have no detailed, rigorous explanations for how complex biochemical systems could arise by a random mutation and natural selection. And these articles do not address that.
And then he starts to say, well, have you read this book, Dr. Behe? And he starts to pile these up on Behe's witness stand. Eventually, Behe was almost dwarfed by the stack of scientific literature on the evolutionary origin of the immune system.
All these hard-working scientists published article after article over years and years, chapters and books, full books, addressing the question of how the vertebrate immune system evolved. But none of them are satisfactory to you.
That's a lawyer's trick. Purely a lawyer's trick. Now, was Michael Behe going to read every one of those books before he responded? It was totally theatrics.
Mr. Rothschild, would you like your books back? They're heavy.
The defense case included 3 expert witnesses. And on the last day of testimony, the final defense witness told the court about a creature that by now was familiar to everyone.
I'm Dr. Scott A. Minnick. I'm an associate professor at the University of Idaho in microbiology.
Dr. Minnick, can you give us an example of design at the molecular level?
This is a bacterial flagellum. This is a system I work with.
We've seen that.
I know.
You're going to see a little more of it, Your Honor.
I kind of feel like Zsa Zsa's 5th husband here, As the old adage goes, I know what to do, I just can't make it exciting. But I'll try.
Now, you specialize your focus and research on the flagellum, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And you've done experiments on the flagellum.
I have.
And you've written peer-reviewed articles on it.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Minnick, a complaint that's often brought up, and plaintiffs' experts have brought it up in this case, is that intelligent design is not testable. It's not falsifiable. Would you agree with that claim?
No, I don't. I have a quote here from Mike Behe. In fact, intelligent design is open to direct experimental rebuttal. To falsify such a claim, a scientist could go into the laboratory, place a bacterial species lacking a flagellum under some selective pressure, for motility, say, grow it for 10,000 generations and see if a flagellum or any equally complex system was produced. If that happened, my claims would be neatly disproven.
Is that an experiment that you would do?
I think about it. I'd be intrigued to do it. I wouldn't expect it to work, but that's my bias.
Now, you claim intelligent design can be tested, correct?
Correct.
Intelligent design, according to you, is not tested at all, because neither you nor Dr. Behe have run the test that you yourself advocate for testing intelligent design, right?
Well, turn it around in terms of these major attributes of evolution. Have they been tested? You see what I'm saying, Steve? It's a problem for both sides.
As the legal teams battled it out in court, the clash between intelligent design and evolution was taking a toll on Dover. Local newspaper reporter Lori Lebo sat through every day of testimony, and the conflict began to drive a wedge between Lori and her father.
He believed that God really should be in science class. He did not believe in science. And he was all worried about me, and because I believed in evolution. And he said, well, do you really believe that we came from monkeys? I'm like, at that point I was pretty burnt out from the trial, and I didn't really have the patience that I probably should have had with him. And I just said, yeah, I do believe in evolution, Dad. And so we'd fight every morning. If you believe in heaven and hell and you believe you have to be saved, nothing else could possibly matter. Not the First Amendment, not science, not rational debate. All that matters is that you're going to be rejoined with the people you love most on this earth.
Teaching the traditional evolutionary Darwinian concept that man evolved from lower forms of life, that's almost a slap in my face. That takes the dignity away from humanity as far as I'm concerned. What gives dignity to man is that every one of us are made in the image of God. He is the creator. and he created the world with intention and with design. It upsets me deeply that now in our educational system we are indoctrinating our young people to think differently about humanity.
I've never made a secret of the fact that I'm a Roman Catholic, and a long tradition of scholarship in the Catholic Church has argued that truth is one, that science and religion should ultimately be in harmony. But that doesn't make faith a scientific proposition. I think, as many religious people do, that faith and reason are both gifts from God. And if God is real, then faith and reason should complement each other rather than being in conflict.
Throughout the trial, Judge Jones would never tip his hand about which way he was leaning on whether intelligent design is science. But science was not the only issue before the court. The climax of the trial would be the judge's ruling on a question stemming from a different line of evidence. When they introduced intelligent design into the classroom, were members of the Dover School Board motivated by religion? If so, that would amount to a violation of part of the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Establishment Clause, which mandates the separation of church and state.
In order to prevail, we needed to prove either that the school board acted for the purpose of promoting religion or that its policy has the effect of promoting religion. It's either purpose or effect, either one.
The Establishment Clause says that Congress cannot pass a law which promotes one religion over another. And that trickles all the way down to any state action, and in this case, the actions of a school board.
But what evidence was there that the school board was motivated by religion? Months before the trial, when Bertha Spar had unpacked the boxes containing the 60 copies of Pandas given by an anonymous donor, she found a clue.
I was directed by the administration to unpack the boxes, count the books, stamp, and number them. In the bottom of the box, I found a catalog. I opened the catalog to see what they had to say about the book in question, and at the very top of the catalog page, it was listed under creation science. This should certainly be a smoking gun and would be a benefit to us somewhere down the road.
This information was handed off to the National Center for Science Education. The NCSE was helping the lawyers who were arguing to keep intelligent design out of Dover High School. Knowing of Pandas and People would be central to the case, Nick Motzke investigated the book.
When the court case was filed and Pandas was adopted in the policy, it became clear that Pandas was going to be the representative of intelligent design for the purposes of this case. And so the history of that book became important, the arguments it made became important, and we undertook to dissect these various aspects in preparation for the case.
Motzke dug into Pandas, examining it page by page, and scouring the internet to see what he could unearth about its history. Rummaging through the NCSE archives one day, Motzke came across a creationist student newspaper from 1981. At the bottom of the front page, he noticed a tiny article with a headline announcing "Unbiased Biology Textbook Planned." And that article mentioned that a man named Charles Thaxton, now a fellow at the Discovery Institute, was working on a book that would present both evolution and creation.
The academic editor was Charles Thaxton, who was the editor of the Pandas book. So it was clear that that ad was referring to the Pandas project. What was interesting is that it talked about the book being about creation and evolution instead of the later terms intelligent design and evolution.
If they could show Pandas started out as a creationist book, that would suggest intelligent design is simply creationism repackaged, and therefore inherently religious. Motzke emailed this information to Eric Rothschild, who immediately issued a subpoena to the publisher of Pandas for any drafts the book went through before printing. In a few months, they received 2 boxes of material. The lawyers sent them to Barbara Forrest, a philosophy professor and author who has been tracking intelligent design for years. She was scheduled to testify in the trial.
Oh my goodness. Those 2 boxes contained about 7,000 pieces of paper. And I had to sit down with those documents and just start flipping through them, which is what I did, day and night.
After much digging, she hit pay dirt. Buried in these documents were 2 drafts of pandas straddling the 1987 case of Edwards versus Aguillard, in which the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional to teach creationism in public school science class. One draft was written before the case, and the other revised just after.
In the first 1987 draft, which is the pre-Edwards draft, the definition of creation reads this way. Creation means that various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator with their distinctive features already intact, fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks and wings, etc. The same definition in this draft, after the Edwards decision, reads this way. Intelligent design means that various forms of life began abruptly through an intelligent agency with their distinctive features already intact, fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, etc. Same definition, just one is worded in terms of creationism, the other one worded in terms of intelligent design.
Everyone said intelligent design is creationism relabeled. Never in our wildest dreams, though, did we think that this would actually be recorded in paper in a way that could be documented in a court case.
And that became probably our best single piece of evidence at trial.
Barbara Forrest's testimony would make a strong case that the Dover School Board was thrusting religion into the classroom. And in comparing the Of Pandas and People drafts, Forrest discovered that the authors had apparently made their revisions in haste.
In cleansing this manuscript, they failed to replace every word properly. I found the word creationists, and instead of replacing the entire word, they just kind of did this and got design proponents with the C in front and the ISTS in the back from the original word.
So the correct term for this transitional form is co-design proponentists. And everyone now refers to this as the missing link between creationism and intelligent design. You've got the direct physical evidence there of a transitional fossil.
Barbara Forrest's testimony not only traced the creationist lineage of pandas. Citing a Christian magazine's interview, Forrest let one of the intelligent design movement's own leaders, Paul Nelson, speak for himself.
The question he was asked was, is intelligent design just a critique of evolutionary theory, or does it offer something more? Does it offer something that humankind needs to know? And this is his answer, quote, easily the biggest challenge facing the ID community is to develop a full-fledged theory of biological design. We don't have such a theory right now, and that's a real problem. Without a theory, it's very hard to know where to direct your research focus. Right now, we've got a bag of powerful intuitions and a handful of notions, such as irreducible complexity, but as yet, no general theory of biological design, end quote.
The evidence she brought into that courtroom really exposed the hypocrisy of the intelligent design movement in a way that's irrefutable. She used their own language, things that they had written and said, to show that they themselves knew that this isn't science.
And on the stand, Michael Behe was asked how he would define science.
Dr. Behe, using your definition, intelligent design is a scientific theory, correct?
Yes.
Under the same definition, astrology is a scientific theory, using your definition, correct?
Using my definition, a scientific theory is a proposed explanation which focuses or points to observable physical data and logical inferences. There are many things throughout the history of science which we now think to be incorrect, which would fit that definition. Yes, astrology is in fact one. So is the ether theory of the propagation of light, and many other theories as well.
The ether theory of light has been discarded.
That is correct.
But you're clear. under your definition, the definition that sweeps in intelligent design, astrology is also a scientific theory.
Yes, that's correct.
You know, when you loosen the rules around what is science and permit the supernatural, permit deities, you are really destroying what makes science so vitally important to the progress that our civilization has witnessed over the last 400 or 500 years. You're going back before the scientific revolution. And, you know, that's a pretty scary thing.
With the scientific revolution, the work of Galileo, Newton, and others banished supernatural explanations from science. But some think the supernatural still has its place.
At the very beginning of genetics, the idea of there being a hereditary factor that somehow was responsible for the traits that we have, but one couldn't quite identify what the factor was. That was also initially regarded as supernatural as well. So it's not that supernaturalism hasn't been part of science. In fact, it has been, and it's often led to very fruitful results. And it seems that the evolutionists want to, in a way, ignore or marginalize that very important part of the history.
But Barbara Forrest testified that the intelligent design movement's goals are not entirely scientific and are spelled out in a secret Discovery Institute document that had surfaced on the internet.
Their goals are listed quite clearly in the Wedge document. It's their strategy document that they drew up about 9 years ago in 1998. Their goal is to completely overthrow all of the effects of evolution on society, which they think are uniformly negative. This document states that they want to completely change American culture back to what they believe is its properly religious foundation. They want every area of life to be governed by their particular religious preferences, and they're very clear about that in this document.
According to the Wedge document, Darwin portrayed humans not as moral and spiritual beings, but as animals, leading people to abandon objective moral standards. The document lays out an ambitious agenda to overthrow this legacy. To see intelligent design theory as the dominant perspective in science, and to see design theory permeate our religious, cultural, moral, and political life. Though not written by Philip Johnson, the Wedge document is an outgrowth of a broader policy he conceived called the Wedge Strategy.
I know it can be made to sound like something sinister and conspiratorial, but the Wedge Strategy, as I've explained it, is quite simple and innocent. When you use a wedge to split a log, you start with the sharp edge of the wedge. My job is to be the sharp edge of the wedge, to use my academic credentials and legal abilities to get some hearing for the proposition that there really is something fundamentally wrong with the Darwinian story. But I can't answer all the questions that arise. And so we need other people to form the thick edge of the wedge to take on the questions that do require scientific expertise.
With Michael Behe and others forming the wide end of the wedge, Johnson hopes the Wedge Strategy will overturn what he sees as the negative effects of a century and a half of Darwin's theory.
The Darwinian story, when it became accepted, had a huge cultural impact. And if that story were discredited, then the cultural impact would be reversed, and there would be cultural changes in the other direction as well.
There is something outrageous about such a huge body of evidence being put together, then being confirmed in all kinds of other scientific disciplines, particularly genetics, and having other people just sort of deny it for reasons that have nothing to do with truth. And this became apparent during the trial. And then you began to look towards the judge and think, how is this guy going to get out of this? Because here he is, he is a Republican, he's been appointed by George W. Bush, who has said that he thinks the jury is out on evolution and both theories should be taught. And you began to think, what is this poor guy going to do?
Whatever the motivations of the Discovery Institute, the intelligent design movement, or the authors of the book Of Pandas and People, Judge Jones would need to focus on the motivation of the Dover Area School Board.
Mr. Buckingham, I'd like to show you what has been identified as Exhibit P145. You'll need to look at your monitor.
The book that was presented to me for biology was laced with Darwinism from the beginning to the end.
William Buckingham is head of the curriculum committee for the Dover School District. He's also a board member. He strongly believes creationism needs to be taught in the classroom.
My opinion that it's okay to teach Darwin, but you have to balance it with something else, such as creationism.
This was back in the very early days of the intelligent design thing. And don't you know, I could not think of the words intelligent design. I just couldn't. The camera's rolling, so I say creationism. In hindsight, I should have said nothing at all, but I said creationism.
I was like a deer caught in the headlights of a car, and I misspoke. Pure and simple. I made a human mistake.
Freudian slip, right, Mr. Buckingham?
I wouldn't say a Freudian slip. I would say a human mistake.
And it was not Buckingham's only mistake. Both Buckingham and Bonsell had sworn in their depositions that they did not know who donated the 60 copies of Pandas to the high school. But by the time Buckingham took the witness stand, a different story emerged.
I stood up in front of our church one Sunday morning. We had to come up with, I think it was like $1,100 to buy these books. I said, I'm not asking anybody for a dime. I'm not telling you I want anything, but we believe in the power of prayer, not church. I said, just pray that the money comes in.
Buckingham's prayers were answered with donations from members of the church.
So I deposited the money in our personal checking account my wife and I have, and I wrote a check to be passed on to whoever's going to buy the books. It was my understanding at that time that a businessman in the community had agreed to take the money and buy the books and donate them to the school. That time I didn't know who it was.
But at the trial, Buckingham admitted he had given that check to Alan Bonsell, and that the unknown businessman who bought the books had been Alan Bonsell's father. This contradicted statements Bill Buckingham and Alan Bonsell had originally made in their sworn depositions.
Lying under oath is a serious crime. We impeached a president about it. And people go to jail for it all the time. It seemed to us that there was testimony that demonstrated clear inconsistency. I can't see into their hearts and know, the extent of the falsehood, but I do know that we asked questions that should have elicited that information, and they didn't provide that information.
It was almost like this weird feeling that, when you've watched a nature show and you know that the gazelle's about to get it from the lion, I remember actually thinking, oh God, Judge Jones is going to kill Alan Bonsell. I can't look. And then Judge Jones, his face had gotten bright red at this point, and he goes, you tell me why you didn't say where that money came from to buy Of Pandas and People. And Alan Bonsell finally, under Judge Jones's grilling, started to get a little nervous, and he started flapping his hands, and he started stammering, and he completely had lost this self-assured composure that he had earlier. And finally he just said, well, I misspoke.
Never in a million years did I ever think that I'd be in a federal lawsuit when I was on the school board or have the school district in something like that. Over a 1-minute statement. A 1-minute statement.
We weren't asking the teachers to become priests or Protestant pastors of some sort or lay ministers or anything like that. Just let the kids know the theory's there. Let the kids do their own research and find answers for themselves.
After 6 weeks, the trial concluded with closing arguments that were as divided as the town of Dover itself had become.
What am I supposed to tolerate? A small encroachment on my First Amendment rights? Well, I'm not going to. I think this is clear what these people have done, and it outrages me. That's a statement of one citizen of Dover, Fred Callahan, standing up to the wedge that has been driven into his community and his daughter's high school by the Dover School Board's anti-evolution, pro-intelligent design policy. This trial has established that intelligent design is unconstitutional because it is an inherently religious proposition, a modern form of creationism. It is not just a product of religious people. It does not just have religious implications. It is, in its essence, religious. The shell game has to stop.
In sum, Your Honor, I respectfully submit that the evidence of record shows that the plaintiffs have failed to prove that the primary purpose or primary effect of the reading of a 4-paragraph statement on intelligent design, explaining that it's an explanation for the origins of life different from Darwin's theory, letting the students know there are books in the library on this subject, does not, by any reasonable measure, threaten the harm which the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits. But instead, the evidence shows that the defendant's policy has the primary purpose and primary effect of advancing science education by making the students aware of a new scientific theory, one which may well open a fascinating prospect to a new scientific paradigm.
Judge Jones said he would return a verdict promptly. Four days after the trial ended, Dover residents rendered their own verdict on intelligent design with a huge turnout for the school board election. By a narrow margin, the people of Dover cleaned house. All 8 of the 9 seats up for election went to anti-intelligent design candidates, including plaintiff and former Dover science teacher Brian Ream. Among the candidates who got the fewest votes was Alan Bonsell. With the judge still deliberating, Dover's local school board election was national news and even provoked the ire of televangelist Pat Robertson.
I'd like to say to the good citizens of Dover, if there is a disaster in your area, don't turn to God. You just rejected him from your city.
Though Robertson had already passed judgment, Dover and the nation would have to wait another month for Judge Jones to render his verdict. On December 20th, 2005, Jones sent out his opinion by email.
I went to work that day. We pretty much knew it was going to be out by noon, so I waited at work for a phone call.
The decision came across the computer, I think it was 10:37.
The columnist behind me, I was reading it from the beginning, and he's standing over my shoulder and he yells at me, "Go to the end! Go to the end!"
I remember Mrs. Spar, Bertha Spar, knocking on my door and interrupting my class.
The 139-page opinion ruled that intelligent design is not science. Finding it had been introduced for religious reasons, Judge Jones decided it was unconstitutional to teach intelligent design in Dover science classes.
Both defendants and many of the leading proponents of intelligent design make a bedrock assumption which is utterly false. Their presupposition is that evolutionary theory is antithetical to a belief in the existence of a supreme being and to religion in general. To be sure, Darwin's theory of evolution is imperfect. However, the fact that a scientific theory cannot yet render an explanation on every point should not be used as a pretext to thrust an untestable alternative hypothesis grounded in religion into the science classroom or to misrepresent well-established scientific propositions. The citizens of the Dover area were poorly served by the members of the board who voted for the intelligent design policy.
Citing what he called the breathtaking inanity of the school board's decision, he found that several members had lied to cover their tracks and disguise the real purpose behind the intelligent design policy.
The crushing weight of the evidence indicates that the board set out to get creationism into science classrooms, and intelligent design was simply the vehicle that they utilized to do that.
Jones recommended to the U.S. attorney that he investigate bringing perjury charges against Buckingham and Bonsell for lying under oath. And the overwhelming evidence at trial, he said, established that intelligent design is a religious view, a mere relabeling of creationism, and not a scientific theory.
In an era where we're trying to cure cancer, where we're trying to prevent pandemics, where we're trying to keep science and math education on the cutting edge in the United States, to introduce and teach bad science to 9th grade students makes very little sense to me. You know, garbage in, garbage out, and it doesn't benefit any of us who benefit daily from scientific discoveries.
The school district was permanently forbidden to teach intelligent design in its science curriculum. The administration was ordered to pay the plaintiffs' legal fees, totaling more than $1 million. And the election of a new school board opposed to intelligent design meant no appeal of the ruling would be mounted. In the wake of the trial, Time magazine named Judge Jones one of the 100 most influential people of the year. But not everyone was so pleased with the judge's decision.
To put it bluntly, I think he's a jackass. I think he went to clown college instead of law school, or else he went to law school and slept during the Constitution classes, because his decision doesn't jive with the law. I think he should be on a bench, but it ought to be in a center ring of Ringling Brothers Circus. It's disgusting.
It makes me feel sad. We as a board were trying to make Dover the best school district it could be. That was our goal. At least mine was. We were trying to take it up to make it the best.
I think, first of all, you have to say we had a fair trial. I'm just disturbed about the extent of his opinion, that it went way beyond what he should have gone into deciding matters of science.
The Discovery Institute was also displeased. Soon after the decision, the Institute published a 123-page book distancing itself from the case and criticizing the ruling as judicial activism with a vengeance. The verdict turned out to be more controversial than Judge Jones had imagined. Following the trial, he received death threats. Jones and his family had to be placed under round-the-clock protection.
I could never have imagined that I would receive threats to my person in an Establishment Clause case, but that's what happened in the Dover case.
For newspaper reporter Lori Lebo, the verdict was bittersweet. Her father passed away just 9 days after the judge's decision. They had never reconciled their differences, though Lori remains a strong supporter of evolution. Recently, her family took over management of her father's radio station, and Lori began hosting a weekly show.
Evening, folks. We're going to listen to some Johnny Cash now. I talk to Jesus every day.
In the end, though, there is probably one thing everyone in the case can agree on.
The issue is certainly not over. One of the things that we've learned is that the opponents of evolution are persistent and resilient, and they're still out there.
I had thought at one point that we would make a breakthrough on this issue and change the scientific community in my lifetime. Now I'm somewhat sobered by the force of the counterattack that we have received, and I see that it's going to be a longer process than that.
I think history tells us that there is an enduring disagreement and dispute in the United States as it relates to evolution. By no means did my decision put a capstone on that, and that will proceed for generations, I suspect.
On the Intelligent Design website, hear NOVA's senior executive producer explain why NOVA took on this controversial topic. Watch any part of this program again, and much more. Find it on pbs.org.
On Nova, when predator termites threaten, only one thing can save this village. Armed with radar-like precision, fierce warrior ants devour everything in their path. But can they be persuaded to attack the termites and not the villagers? Master of the Killer Ants, next time on Nova.
To order this show or any other NOVA program for $19.95 plus shipping and handling, call WGBH Boston Video at 1-800-255-9424.